Hey out there everyone, in today's video I'm going to discuss how to get started in improvising. But before I do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and make sure to leave a comment below. Alright, so my journey in improvising, it actually started pretty early on. When I was a teenager, I would play along to the CDs that I had, and I would do whatever I could to play along with it. There was a few licks that I learned from the lead guitar players, and I would try to apply that over pretty much the course of the whole song. So I'd put on a song and I would look at that as more of a opportunity to play over a backing track. And that's one of the ways that I got started. Not long after that, and this kind of shows, I guess, age-wise where I stand, is that later on I would use a cassette player and I would record myself playing a rhythm track, and then I would put that tape onto another tape player, play that, set it next to my amp that I had, put another tape in the tape recorder, and while the rhythm track's playing, I would solo at the same time and record that. That way I could put it in my car and listen to it. So, I mean, from the very early stages of my development, I was already trying to figure out how to improvise. The issue, though, was I knew some of what to do by using my ears because I could hear what would work. But there were a lot of things that I didn't quite understand in how to apply certain ideas over changes or anything like that. And really the music that I was playing over didn't have any changes to it anyways, for the most part. Not a slam on heavy metal because I'm a huge fan of heavy metal. Still am. Still listen to it all the time. But playing over something where you have basically a chord that's static is a lot different than taking on a song like Coltrane's Countdown. And trying to just take a scale and play over that just doesn't work very well, especially like one scale that you may know, which for a lot of guitar players, it really is the pentatonic scale. In particular, the E minor, A minor pentatonic scale. So what was it that helped me to break this barrier, and what would I advise to you in order to get started? Well, first, I would start with major scales. I would start at the most basic idea. Now, do you have to start with major scales? No. But if you have a major scale, then you have some notes that you know will work. You can hear them over top of a chord. So, for example, if I did play my C chord, I can hear over this chord, if I play a C major scale, it's going to work. So if that works over top of the C major, then I could set up something, and now with all the opportunities that you have out there, you can record yourself on your phone or on an iPad, or if you have a loop pedal, or if you have a freeze pedal, any of these things will allow you to be able to do this. All you have to do is enter in this chord or play a rhythm if you want, and just start playing the scale up and down, and hear how that scale sounds over top of the chord that's being played. Now, this might not sound very musical, although I would say that you should, over the long span of your practice and developing, you should be able to have that ability to make music out of something as basic as running a scale. And there's some examples of songs that I could give, but just for the sake of making sure that nothing violates any YouTube rules, I'm not going to play any particular melodies right now. But you can base melodies, improvisation, all these things off of a basic major scale. So I would start there, and you can start with C. I would eventually get to the point to where you can go through all 12 keys and be able to use those scales to be able to, one, learn your instrument, gain the facility to play on your instrument, but also to be able to know what notes are accessible to you. All right, so you have the whole scale down. But do you have to use every note of the scale? No. And I'd actually say don't use all the notes of the scale. Once you play it down a few times up and down, that right there is going to help you to internalize. But what I would say is to move away from playing just a straight up scale up and down. You don't need to do that. What you can do is, again, you have your chord, like your C major. You play that chord, and all you need to do, and you can limit yourself in whatever way your instrument allows for. Guitar players, we can limit the strings that we're on. But if I take a look at C major again, and I think about just, first few notes of the scale descending on the top two strings, and this, if you're unsure with my 5 shapes and how I look at the guitar, make sure to check the links below where my lessons and courses are. That way you can become familiar with how I see the fretboard. But what I would use, let's say I have those 6 notes. You could even start with less than 6 notes. You can start with the top 3. And just play around with the idea of just the 3 notes and then adding to that. You could even start with as little as 2 notes. But if you allow yourself to have fewer notes, or another way of saying it, limit yourself with this creative limitation, right? Limited creativity is the way I usually term this when I'm talking about it. But what you're doing is just taking away a whole bunch of things that you really don't have to think about and making it so you can really focus in on a few. So if you had the top few notes here to work with, then you could be playing something here. And that allows you the opportunity to explore that for what it is, not being overwhelmed with a bunch of note choices, but using notes that, for the most part, work out pretty well. You're probably going to hear that some notes sound like they want to go somewhere else, especially if you're like on that 7th scale degree, like a B natural. If you're playing a C major 7, you can hear that sounds pretty. But I mean, if you're improvising and you happen to record yourself playing like a basic C chord, or a triad up top, and you're hitting that note, you're going to hear that dissonance. So don't necessarily back away, but just understand that depending on how you've voiced the chord, you may hear that dissonance. But for the most part, these notes work out just fine. So start, one, with the scale, but then go off into really reducing down your note choices. That way you can really explore and come up with melodies. And while you're at it, record some of them or jot them down if you're able to write music for yourself. All right, so continuing with that idea, except being more specific, let's now talk about chord tones. Now you could also say arpeggio, right? So if I play the notes, what I've played is a C major 7 in 2 octaves. But let's say you're using that C major again. When the chords are going by, what you can do, and again, you could have something that's set up in the back. You can use a drum app, you can use a metronome, you can use a backing track. But what you want to do is limit yourself down to only working with the chord tones of the arpeggio. Now, I'm more towards calling it the chord tones because I'm not necessarily thinking about just straight up arpeggios. Although you could do that. You could think I'm just going to run arpeggios over top of this and come up with patterns. And that's great. I would highly suggest doing that too. But when I talk about chord tones, what I usually like to do is try to see it as using a scale. So if I had my C major scale and I tell you, you can focus just on the chord tones by themselves, which gives you the arpeggio, but you could be using the scale. You could use your major scale, and when it comes time to play over top of that C major, what you have to do is every four beats, so every bar, every measure, you're having to play the root note. That's your focus. And then you focus on the third, after a few times with the root, make sure you got that. So then focus on hitting the third, then focus on hitting the fifth, then focus on hitting the seventh. So you could start your phrases off with the root, and then come back to it again. You could do the same with the third, right? So I'm going out of time right now, but it's still, you put on a backing track or a metronome, make sure that you're in time, but right now I'm playing it out of time. The fifth, and then the seven. So you're trying to focus in to hear those particular tones, because when you're playing over changes, the ability to hit the chord tones will outline these changes, give you these guide points to go towards, to hit. That way your line has some kind of a trajectory, a path that it goes towards. And it doesn't always have to be that you resolve on a chord tone on the downbeat. But in the beginnings, you have to set up a limitation to be able to practice these things, to get them in your playing, and then later forget about them. Alright, so I'm going to leave you with two more ideas to implement into your practice while you're trying to develop the ability to work on playing changes, or basically to improvise, to get started. Transcription, or pulling from other people. At least doing that. Do you have to transcribe complete solos? No. Do you necessarily always have to pull the exact notes that someone is playing? No. But capturing the concept of what they're doing. So, for example, if I heard that someone was playing something that doesn't sound like a scale, it's not that they're running up a scale, it sounds like they're maybe using some sort of an interval, like a third, and they're applying that in their line, then I can take the basic idea. Now, if you're new to all this and you're just starting out, then maybe some of these things won't be as apparent to you. But if you're studying with someone, you have a teacher, then you can ask them for help to identify some of these lines, some of these things that you're hearing. But if you're capturing even something more basic, like you hear that, oh, they ascend and then they descend, or they ascend, descend, and then they go up, or there's, these bigger leaps in their playing. If you're hearing these type of things, maybe you're hearing like force in their lines, or you're in like the fifths and then maybe resolving to another interval. There's so many things that you can pull from a line, but I would say that you have to start somewhere. It doesn't have to be the same licks, lines that everybody else is doing, or someone else told you that you need to go check this out and pull from this, because this is the recording. This is the line you must learn. You don't have to do that. Although there are tons of these phrases that a lot of people have learned that exist in the jazz world, you don't have to go that route. It could be something that just catches your ear that you really like and that you want to apply into your own playing. And then once you have that line, start to freely improvise in a major key, and then start to incorporate the elements of the phrase that you picked up. Finally, what I would say to do is to write your own lines. It's an important thing to be able to internalize the things that you are hearing, internalize those things, and then bring them out into the real world, to bring them out onto your instrument. And one of the ways that you can do that to the best of your capabilities is to write out your own lines. Come up with your own thing. A lot of times in my practice over the years, I've just sat down with the instrument and started to come up with things. And it could be a lot of nothing really in the beginning, things that I don't really like. I could sit down and play the guitar for half an hour and not really hear a thing that I like. However, there are times where something is played and you're not really aware where it came from, but you're like, you know what? I really like what I'm hearing there, and I don't want to forget it, so you can write it down. But let's say you don't have that ability yet to notate out the music. I would say that every time that you practice, you should be recording. Every time. Record yourself. That way, if you're like, you know what, I don't know how to write that down. I played it really quick. I don't really remember exactly how I played it. You documented what it was that you played. Now you can go back and you can start to pull that idea back from the recording that you made. And then do your best. Like I said, do your best to write out your own ideas. The more practice you put into that, the better it will become. I know in the beginning it's a real pain, but put in the time. That way it's a skill that you acquire, which will be very beneficial overall as you continue to grow as a musician. Alright everyone, I want to thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave a comment below. Let me know if there's any particular topic that you would like for me to discuss in future videos. Also, don't forget to check the description below. That's where you're going to find a link to my lessons and courses, as well as my music that is available on all streaming platforms. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you next time.